Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian.
My guest today is the great Yurko, assistant teaching professor and director of sports analytics at Carnegie Mellon University. In our conversation, Ron shares how Bayesian statistics and especially hierarchical models can unlock new ways of thinking about player performance. We talk about his work on the NFL WAR model, how tracking data and expected points models are reshaping football analytics, and why full uncertainty propagation is essential when evaluating player contributions. Ron also emphasizes the importance of teaching students not just how to use models, but how to write them, developing the statistical thinking needed to succeed in sports analytics. We also dive into the challenges of estimating player performance in team sports, where collinearity and role complexity make modeling difficult, and the exciting frontier of using tracking data to analyze player movement. This is Learning Bayesian Statistics, episode 140, recorded July 22, 2025.
Let me show you how to be a good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. What's a Bayesian? It's someone who cares about evidence.
Welcome to Learning Bayesian Statistics, a podcast about Bayesian inference, the methods, the projects, and the people who make it possible. I'm your host, Alex Andorra. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Andorra, like the country. For any info about the show, learnbayesstats.com is la place to be. Show notes, becoming a corporate sponsor, unlocking Bayesian merch, supporting the show on Patreon, everything is in there. That's learnbayesstats.com. If you're interested in one-on-one mentorship, online courses, or statistical consulting, feel free to reach out and book a call at topmate.io/Alex_Andorra. See you around, folks, and best Bayesian wishes to you all. And if today's discussion sparked ideas for your business, well, our team at PIMC Labs can help bring them to life. Check us out at pimc-labs.com. Ron Yurko, welcome to Learning Bayesian Statistics.
Thanks for having me. I listen to this a lot, so it's an honor to be on officially.
Yeah, that's also an honor to have you on. I've been meaning to invite you for a few months now, and not only because you were kind enough to help me with the green card, but just you do so many fun stuff. I was like, okay, this guy needs to come on the show. And also, then I listened to you on the Wharton Moneyball podcast, which I listen to every week. And when I heard you were there, I was like, oh, cool. So that means he must have some new stuff to talk about. So that's a good moment to.
I have too many things going on. I'm one of those people where it's just too much. Summertime is like when I get to dabble in everything too.
Yeah, I saw that. I love that. For me as a podcaster, it's great because then I've way too many questions for you. So let's actually get into your origin story, because so today you do a lot of stats modeling, but you do also a lot of sports modeling in particular, and it looks like you love that. But I'm curious what first drew you to stats, and how did that interest evolve into marrying to sports data rather than genetics or finance or marketing?
Yeah, the funny thing is, so my interest in statistics started from sports. All right, I grew up, I'm from Pittsburgh, Western PA area. So I grew up a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan. My dad went to Penn State, so I followed Penn State college football a lot. I played baseball my whole life. I was a sports fan. Honestly, like, even just entering high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I wanted to work in sports in some way, and like I remember reading about becoming like an orthopedic surgeon, and if you'd be an individual, working on sports injuries. I thought that could be a really exciting career. And then I read Moneyball, and then that completely changed my life trajectory, like many people. in the 2000s and whatnot, reading Moneyball. The movie came out then, I remember when I was a senior in high school. And like I was already addicted at that point to sabermetrics, baseball stats. And that honestly led me to entering college. The funny thing was I actually heard about like the Pittsburgh Pirates, my favorite team growing up, my local team. They had an information systems department. So I applied to Carnegie Mellon University for their information systems major, got in, and I thought, all right, this is the right track. And then I realized information systems was effectively like becoming a data engineer, database management stuff. And I didn't want to do that, but I had taken, intro statistics course. I had AP stats and high school, and I realized, wait a second, this is actually what I'm interested in. I'm interested in learning from data. How can we infer from data? How can I, what can I measure to understand who are the best baseball players? How can I project baseball player performance? That was my initial motivation and path into statistics, as well as things like fantasy football. Like sports led me to statistics, which I think is common for a number of people in my generation. I know some, opposite way, like Luke Bourne, for instance, was one that was science and then led him into sports. I was very much sports, and it led me down the path of science, though, eventually to when in my PhD, my dissertation was focused on problems in statistical genetics. I do a lot of work also now in working with text data, NLP problems, but sports was always what I really had a passion for along the way. I did have the opportunity when I was an undergrad. I landed this internship with the Pittsburgh Pirates as a data analytics intern. This was during the 2014 season. And for me, it was kind of like landing the dream job. I learned, though, this was pre-StatCast era in baseball. So what I had to do was, as an intern, I charted every game that took place. Along with another intern, where we would have this overhead camera, and this is all public knowledge now about what the Pirates did back in the day, because we'd have the overhead camera of the field, and then I have to mark, where's everybody out in the field when the ball is being released from the pitcher's hand? Where's everybody out in the field when the ball is crossing home plate? Where's everybody out on the field when the ball is hitting to play? And I would repeatedly do this every single pitch, every single moment. And it was to generate the data that did not exist that the Pirates ultimately would use to infer optimal defensive positioning for their shifting at the time. And I would do things like send reports and whatnot. And I realized I didn't have the passion for like the day-to-day of working for a team. But I had the opportunity to develop like a long-term project at the time with the Pirates, and that to me was the most interesting thing, and that was really my first exposure to research, and that led me to the path of I eventually wanted to go PhD in statistics. I briefly worked in finance before my PhD, but while I was doing that, I was really collaborating with Dr. Sam Ventura, who used to be CMU Stats PhD, then professor, and he ended up consulting with the Pittsburgh Penguins for a couple of years before going there full time, and is now VP Hockey Strategy and Research for the Buffalo Sabres. He was really a mentor of mine, as well as Andrew Thomas, who he used to be a visiting professor at CMU, but now he's bounced around at different places in sports, and has recently been running the analytics group, R&D team with the Detroit Tigers in this past year. So the two of them really were sort of guiding me along my path as an undergrad and then post graduation. And then along with another student I graduated with, Max Horowitz, we worked on this project called NFL Scraper, where we were accessing NFL play-by-play data, building models from that. And that really segued then into my PhD, because that was like my first real paper, and started just continuing down this path of becoming a person in sports analytics, going to conferences. And fortunately, it was great timing with Professor Rebecca Nugent, who's now the department head here, where we started doing things like launching a sports analytics conference that started my first year as a PhD student. I don't think I would recommend other PhD students to organize a conference when they start. It's a lot of work. But once it develops over time and you become faculty doing it becomes a lot easier. And yeah, that's really sort of my path to where I am now. I ended up finishing my PhD in stats, advised by Catherine Rader and Max Gazelle. Stayed on then as teaching faculty. The opportunity came up with Carnegie Mellon, and had this perfect blend of getting to work on interesting research problems that I'm passionate about in sports and some other areas, as well as developing curriculum and leading this was now the Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Center that officially launched this past year. So it's been I've lucked out. It's been a pretty exciting time. And I still do some consulting. I did also previously work part-time when I was finishing my PhD with a company called Zealous Analytics that was co-founded by Luke Bourne, Dan Trevone, and Doug Fearing. But I opted, much to their chagrin, they keep asking me, but I decided to go the path of academia. And I've just been having a blast. It's been such a fun job.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and by preparing the episode, I can see you're having a lot of fun, because I see you're doing so many stuff, and that's really incredible and impressive, and congrats on that role that you've been to craft for yourself from your early passion in sports. I have to say I'm impressed by the level of self-awareness you were already exhibiting in high school, because you didn't know what you want to do, but you were already asking yourself that. That was not my case. So it's something.
I definitely have lucked out every step of the way. Of even my job is a very weird job. I don't think I don't think this style is common across universities. Even this teaching track role that we have. It's even unique within CMU in sort of our Dietrich College, how we define teaching track. So it's just a lot of luck along the way, I'd say, more than.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. You always need randomness to go your way at some point, right? But I would say it's like that for pretty much anything. So that even in especially in sports, right? I mean, it depends on the game, but I'm a big soccer fan, for instance, and soccer definitely has a lot of often it's decided by one big cup is decided by just one game, and it's 90 minutes and can go really one way or the other, and it's really funny when you just randomness is not on your team's side these days, or randomness is always there along the way.
Well, that's why soccer is great, because there's no playoffs. It's just you play this nice long season, and then whoever's the winner at the end of the full, the regular season of the Premier League. That's it. You don't have to worry about the randomness of playoffs deciding the champion. Yeah,
we have the cups though, and the cups. So the Champions League is getting less He's getting more starting to look more like a championship, and I think that's kind of their objective. But it used to be much more of a cup, and that was a bit. Yeah, I mean, as a statistician, I don't really like that, because that often, it helps. It injects a bit artificially randomness in the mix. So, because it's a cup. So now it's less that. Personally, though, as a spectator, I also like it for it to be randomness, because then it's also an entertainment. It's also a show. So I find it's hard. It's hard to find the balance between deterministic and random show, but you definitely want both in there, I'd say.
Yeah, the balance of it, right? The NBA playoffs this year was one example of the Oklahoma City Thunder were by far the best team, and if the NBA usually was a sport, and there's this great paper by Mike Lopez, Ben Ballmer, Greg Matthews a while ago, how often does the best team win? Where they were looking at that, the randomness between different sports, and basketball was the least random. But,
Yeah.
they went up against the Indiana Pacers, who were an underdog story throughout the postseason, surprising people and whatnot. So yeah, it's always fun to have, underdogs throughout.
No, for sure. And so, okay, that's for sports in particular. What about Bayesian stats, right? Because you said you listen to that show often. So first, thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm curious, when do you remember when you were first introduced to Bayesian stats, and how often do you get to use them in your modeling work and teaching?
Yeah, this is a fun question because, I was thinking about this from the viewpoint, like in hindsight, when did I actually learn about Bayesian stats without knowing I was learning about Bayesian stats? And, I read Tom Tango's The Book on baseball sabermetrics and whatnot, and nothing's actually like formal statistics in there. Someone that basically self-derived a number of different quantities, and he had this projection system for trying to project future performance, which in hindsight I realize now was my first exposure to something like empirical Bayes, of taking an observed estimate of a person and shrinking it towards league average information. Right? I didn't know at the time that's what was going on, and then more formally. At CMU as an undergrad, I was able to take like a special topics course on astrostats, and that astrostats class taught some basics of Bayesian methods. And I really didn't understand what I was doing as an undergrad then, but that was probably my first exposure beyond just in a classroom. Oh, here's Bayes' theorem, all right, which is that you learn Bayes' theorem, you don't actually learn about Bayesian inference, really. All right, that's just learning Bayes' role in the classic smoking causes cancer, or cancer smoking problem, right? Like that's just the viewpoint of how often many people are just exposed to Bayes in their beginning. But then, as I talked a bit earlier about like working on this project with NFL play-by-play data and figuring out how to model that data, and prior to the start of my PhD, that's when I got hooked on reading Andrew Gelman's blog, started reading that actively, I read through that classic book. I have it in my office. Data Analysis Using Regression and Multi-Level / Hierarchical Models by Gelman and Hill. So I read that prior to starting my PhD, and that sort of completely changed a lot of my mindset about modeling and the importance of, polling, and then how to incorporate hierarchical structure and how relevant that is in sports. And even when I was first getting exposed to that, I wasn't even thinking about it in a fully Bayesian sense. I mean, I was technically learning about multi-level models in the classic frequentist way with the layered Ware variance estimation. It's only as I developed in my PhD, started to really make that transition to, I can just do things fully Bayesian if I really want to account things in a very rich way, and just take advantage of having posterior samples from the get-go rather than relying on the standard errors from Fisher's information, right? For just simple confidence intervals. So it was sort of a path where I was, and I think others have said this, like multi-level models are mixed effects models, right? When people first learn about random effects, that is like the gateway drug into Bayesian statistics for many folks, because you just start to learn about polling and this use of this hierarchical model and the distribution assumptions that you could say that, if I'm modeling NFL data, I can have these QBs come from their own distribution. I'm going to pull QBs together, have this variance that's being estimated, and that's sharing of information across the quarterbacks, and it applies this shrinkage, and, how you could build from that and actually account for more informative prior knowledge, right? To have better approaches for estimating like QB performance in some way. That led me to the path of more formal Bayesian modeling that then I've actually tried to really install in the classroom more so, because CMU, Carnegie Mellon used to really be a Bayesian school, and then it's kind of gone away from that. And I think part of it is not necessarily leaning towards like one way versus another. I think there's just a lot of what people are doing and the research, the theoretical research advances they're trying to do. And there's a big belief in trying to minimize assumptions in whatever way possible. And, things like in the world of conformal inference and, distribution-free assumptions that they make. And while that's nice and all, I think, and one of the lessons I stress with students too is, it can be really beneficial to be extremely explicit about every single assumption you're making, right? And when you build a Bayesian model, that is inherently what you're doing, right? We're explicitly laying out the model in every step, every level of the data that we're dealing with. And then from that, we can check that model without even observing, without even estimating quantities yet, getting posteriors, and you can do prior predictive checks to get a sense of, if this even is something that's reasonable, right? Going through this process for them to take advantage of being very explicit at coming up with a data generating process, the data generating story from the modeling framework. And I think that aspect of Bayesian modeling is probably the biggest advantage for me, right? And thinking about it's almost like building Lego blocks together in a way of like, how do I assemble these models in the way I want to do it? And when it comes together, it's beautiful, right? So that it's like a self-taught path in a way, which I don't think is unusual. I think a lot of people have to go that path of getting a lot of self-education on Bayesian modeling. And one of the things I've been doing is trying to decrease it from just being totally self-taught and getting it into my courses that I teach at CMU.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, yeah, most of the people I talk to, and my case is also the same. It's just like you have to teach yourself Bayesian stats. I mean, teach yourself, not really, because like you rely, as you were saying, you rely on a lot of textbooks and courses, but it's more like you don't have a formal, Bayesian statistics degree, because most of the time they don't exist. So it's mostly that. So you have to
it's where it gets introduced in the curriculum. I was just at the United States Conference on Teaching Statistics this past week, and one of the co-authors of Bayes' Roles, which is one of the best introductions for undergrads on applied Bayesian modeling. I'm going to butcher her name. Her first name's Mine. I'm not going to struggle with saying her last name, but
she was on the podcast.
She gave this great short talk about this was at the beginning of the conference where people are horrified, come up to her like, you teach Bayesian statistics in an intro class, and her response is, you teach sampling distributions in an intro class. When the discussion of no one understands what the central limit theorem is in these intro statistics courses, right? But that's what we focus on, because we're just focused on teaching the classic frequentist statistics. But what I found, and what she was talking about too, is students grasp Bayesian statistics much easier for them to just understand and comprehend. We think of like the difference between confidence intervals and credible intervals, right? They always screw up what a confidence interval is. They understand what a credible interval is. They think a confidence interval is a credible interval, right? They don't understand like what the frequentist view is really implying. They think it's implying what they get from Bayesian stats. So it motivates just, well, you should be teaching this earlier.
Yeah. Couldn't say better. And so if people want more about that, Mine was on the show, Mine Doguchu, I think that's her name, episode 42. And so we talk about her book and her teaching philosophy. Very inspiring, especially if you're in a role where you have to teach a lot or mentor. Definitely give it a listen. But yeah, I mean, I resonate with, of course, everything you just said. And in my experience also, not only do people come to Bayesian stats in more of a personal way, where a lot of the time it's curious and self-starter people, just by sampling bias, because they want to solve a problem they have, and well, they have to go grab the most appropriate tools that was not given to them. But by definition here, if you think causally, you are talking about people who have the grit and resources to do that. Most of the time, these the kind of people I end up talking to, and often, very, very often, the motivation is adding some kind of hierarchical effect somewhere in a model because it is just so much easier to do it in the Bayesian framework, and that's also so ubiquitous in any modeling you're doing. So very often that's how people end up, going to the Bayesian framework. Very practical path most of the time. And since you were talking about hierarchical model and also just iterative learning, and you're just a lifelong learner, I can tell, Ron. Like, I'm curious. In 2019, you released a really cool paper called NFL War that I read a lot, by the way, last year, because I wanted to really understand war, and that's when I started wanting to really do sports analytics as a job. And so while I was looking for a job, what I did was like, okay, I'm gonna try and implement war, but for soccer, which of course, you have to adapt a lot of things, but that's a project I did last year that was super fun. Of course, ended up using hierarchical GPs and fun stuff like that. And I'll put that in the show notes, because in the end we wrote with Max Goebel, who was also on the show. We ended up putting all of that in a GitHub repo. So if you guys are interested, there is the whole model in there. Big Parency model with GPs and ordered logic, likelihood.
That's on our reading list for this fall. I haven't read the paper yet because I did hear you talk about it before.
Oh, nice.
But our research lab, we got it on the reading list for the fall.
Nice.
Might reach out to you later about it too.
Cool. Yeah. Whenever you want. That would be super fun for sure. I know. So I will put the link in the show notes to that. To the GitHub repo, and then in the repo you have the code and you have the link to the archive paper. We didn't bother trying and submit that somewhere because we're not academics. But if someone wants to do that for us, for sure. But this is not a fun process, at least for me. So why would I do that? But that's great to hear that you want to look into that, Ron. I'm happy to help with anything on that. But so anyways, yes, I did that. That was mostly a self-teaching project to really understand war, because then I was going to work in a baseball team, but didn't know a lot about baseball at the time. So I was like, oh, let's try and translate war to soccer. And so I read your paper a lot and I really loved it. And well done for also the writing style. I liked it because it was much more engaging, than the classic academic paper. Like most of the academic paper are really just boring because they are not optimized for reading. This one was much funnier. So so that paper was great, and it's in the show notes. But it's from 2019, and I'm guessing you learned a lot since then.
And it was really from 2017, actually.
Oh wow!
That's
okay,
the academic writing process.
So, case in point. So in that paper, you have a hierarchical model, and you compute wins above replacement, but in American football. And so I'm curious if you rewrote. That's very hard to say with a French accent. If you rewrote that model today, but with what you know now, and if you had richer tracking data, what would you change first?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this was the project that I was mentioning earlier. Like, this was my first real sports analytics research project this was my exposure to building hierarchical models, like actually implementing them. The first step that I always think about, and we put this at the end of the paper, and others have gone on to do this, Paul Saban, who I believe you had on the show before, he wrote a version of this idea of the first step being actually doing the all 22, so 11 players on both sides of the field, the all 22 adjusted plus minus style approach for modeling player level effects at the play level. And so when I say adjusted plus minus, well, I really mean regularized adjusted plus minus, where literally you're fitting a regression model where you have indicator variables effectively denoting who is on the field, right? And you could have offense, defense variables. You know, football's great because they're only playing one side ever over the course of the season. But then you could have different distributions for different positions. So linebackers get pulled together, cornerbacks get pulled together, QBs get pulled together, right? And you could have this nice structure in place. And I think that one of the problems, though, with this, of just dealing with the play level data, is this massive amount of collinearity that we have between players that are involved in football. Like, unless we observe injuries, you know, you're never going to tease apart the quarterback from the center, the person snapping the QB the football, because the center is always on the field. And so if we just do this naive approach, we're going to struggle with that. And that could motivate, well, okay, how do we handle something like some prior knowledge about the role, the importance the player has, you know, or just some prior beliefs you may have about how much the QB matters. And some folks have thought about, like, oh, you could use like salary data as an informative prior to tease apart how much one contributes versus another at the play level when trying to estimate, you know, these coefficients for players. And that's one way. I don't know if I think it's an optimal way. The thing we've really focused on in these last so many years is just thinking about, okay, there's all this tracking data that now NFL teams have access to. And my PhD student, Kwong Wen, he has a whole thesis titled now, he just completed his thesis proposal on statistical modeling problems for player movement in sports with tracking data. And so he's really tackling this from the player movement perspective. But, you know, one could think about how can we leverage what we know from tracking data to maybe incorporate into this estimation of these player coefficients via, you know, how much they mattered in the play. And we've been going in this work of thinking about like what the hypothetical could look like for a player, of if we model the hypothetical movement, or if we perturb the player in some way, what would that change? What would we expect to change on the outcome? And could we compute almost like the leverage or the amount of weight saying how much the player mattered in a play? And then instead of just having zeros and ones, we have something that's between 0 and 1. Like, oh, if the QB behaved very differently, the QB, you know, well, QB's always the most important player. So I'll switch to say, if this wide receiver ran a slightly different route or did something differently, you know, what effect could that have had on the other wide receiver? You know, how much influence did that wide receiver have? And that could change just whether or not I have them 0 or 1, or, oh, this person was more close to 1 because they really were involved, or they exceed 1 because they had so much involvement, or this person, they were on the other side of the field, nowhere near the action. What if I could move them all around? It wouldn't change the outcome in any way. They basically get a 0, right? That could tease apart. You know, that's this idea that we've been really trying to think about and developing, of how could we marry these two concepts effectively, of some classical hierarchical modeling of discrete level data, which has the goal of inference ultimately. Like, I'm trying to estimate what was the impact of a player, right? And how can I use the tracking data to tease apart and break up this problem of collinearity and, yeah, just the fact that the play level unit is too coarse. You know, can I use the tracking data to help me tease apart what are the moments that maybe even matter, and do the estimation at those moments even. Yeah, so I have been thinking about how to do that paper better since I wrote that paper in 2017. Like it's just there's so many different ideas, and it's been nice to see at least people follow up on it in a number of different ways. Like Paul Saban wrote that paper of with the ESPN data that he had, basically just he implemented what we talked about of, hey, I'm going to do wrap them for the all 22 and I'll do it for NFL and college. And he has a great discussion of like the problems that comes with of trying to do that. But then, another idea one could take advantage of is there's even just charted information at the play level. And maybe one could go about that process of including like in the prior for the player distributions, like, oh, if I have charted information of did they have a successful block or not, or if they do some event, I could condition on that in my prior for the player level effects, like whatever matters, what almost like box score stats at the play level that could be observed, and that could tease apart my players in some way. That's a long answer of the different types of things I've thought about and like how to correct or improve upon what was really at the time too. I'd say it was limited to what we just had available. We didn't know with that play-by-play data. We only knew who was directly involved in the play. We did not have access to all 22 players, and that's still even limited. There was a public batch of it getting released for a period of time. So from 2016 to about like halfway through 2022, I believe through the NFL FastStar NFL verse, you can download all 22 participation data, but then they cut it off. And so now so there's just like this nice little window of time that it's there. But then there's also the tracking data samples that come out from the NFL Big Data Bowl each year. And that's what like my group has really been leveraging and working with for the past so many years. And from there, who's all on the field, but far more than that. Where everybody is at every 10th of a second, right? And can you infer the contributions at a much more granular level there? And it's a challenging problem. It's still open work of trying to address this. And I don't know if we'll ever. I don't know when we'll see really like the first good version of WAR for the NFL. I know Pro Football Focus had a version, and I think it seemed pretty in line with like what we had in a way. Probably biased a little too much towards the players that were directly involved. But at some point, we're going to get to this stage, and it might be behind the scenes. There might be some teams or companies that think they've figured it out. But that's been something I've thought about for years now. How can I make that better and better across all 22 players, not just the QB?
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely resonate with that. It's the same for me. Like each time I deploy a model, or I'm done with a paper or something like that, it's as if I'm like, I'm underestimating it in the sense that I already know all its flaws, and so then I put it out there, and then maybe people like it, and they're like, oh yeah, that's great, and then I'm like, yeah, but I think it'd be better with this or with that, and it's just like the work is like that also as a modeler, where you have also to get good at, sure, always seeing what's next, but also being able to celebrate the momentary wins. Definitely a challenge. But yeah, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying, where you're like, okay, this is published now, how can we make it better? And I also, that resonates a lot with the experience I had trying and doing that in soccer, and that's also why I used a lot your paper to came up with ours, because like football, American football and soccer are much closer than baseball and soccer are, because they are much more continuous and depend a lot more on the other players. And we ended up having to do the same thing, at least for the first version, where we were like, okay, let's just focus on one position. For us, it was the striker, and then you incorporate the rest of the positions. But it's like if I had to do it for if I had to do it for a professional club, I would definitely need to come up with different wars for each position, and then trying to find a way to combine all that for the whole team. But definitely you need a different way to estimate what a player brings to the team in soccer and football, because they are very specialized and also much more continuous and dependent on the rest of the team.
Yeah, and soccer, the one of the biggest challenges too is the actual events that you have are far fewer in terms of what we think of as traditional events, like whether it's, goals are extremely, small count.
Yeah.
But then, even just shot attempts is not that many. Like, at least in NFL, we have every play. It has a start and an end point. And so we just accumulate a lot of events. The scoring is still relatively low, but there's still constant, plays and outcomes that are observed in different ways. It's the complexity, though, of how the players are interacting with each other that just makes it so much more difficult than things like baseball, right? Baseball's got this there's a batter, there's a pitcher, then there's a ball in the play, and then the defense will do things. But there's a base running, and that's complex, right? Handling base running is extremely difficult. There's no denying about that, I think. But the basics of batter pitcher matchup is so much simpler than everything that can happen in a football play. And this conversation just reminded me actually of when I was a PhD student. After I got this paper out, funny enough, there was a STAN workshop that was led by Michael Betancourt that a number of PhD students we got to go for free. And I had talked to him about this problem, and he said, "Oh, you should just do it from the ground up from personnel packages." And that thought has always stayed with me of like, oh, you should model from the personnel packages. And then, if a player changes teams, then you could generate, if a player, this is their effect, their contribution when they're personnel package with 2 tight ends versus 1 tight ends. And each team has a different mixture of how they use these different personnel packages. So for people that don't know what that means just different counts of different types of positions on the field that they can have, whether that's on offense or defense. And teams vary in their style. And so one could imagine if I have a wide receiver's effect for each of these different potential personnel packages. If I see how that player goes from one team to the next, I can see hypothetically what would I estimate to be their contribution, right, during the trade. Like, if you're running this style of offense, their value would only estimate to be blank. But if you're running this style of offense, the value would actually be lower or higher, depending on that shift in that personnel package distribution. And that's another thing where that's a layer of how the players could be arranged that could matter in this estimation. I've never done it. That information is public, though, in those samples I talked about, and it could be one way to improve upon that problem. At some point, one of these days, I'm going to get back to it, or I'm going to make a student do it.
Yeah, but that makes sense. I mean, if you think from a very causal perspective, that's definitely also the way I would do it in soccer also, because you try to find the most, elemental building blocks, and then once you have that, then for sure, you can add it to a different team and see how the characteristics of that team interact with the player's characteristic. But your idea is mostly try and find the root nodes of the causal graph and then modeling the rest with that. And war is just an emerging phenomenon of the player's characteristics. But this is not the lever you're going to pull to actually make a causal experiment on the player's abilities, right? War is determined by other characteristics that comes before it in the DAG. And if you can model that, that is much, much more powerful than just looking at war.
Yeah. And war itself, just as like this idea, there's this whole thing of wins above replacement. Replacement is the I can't stand that word personally. I I have struggled with what that's supposed to mean. And that's across all sports. Instead of us doing it relative to what we're inferring to be average, which it's probably not even the average player because of the whole selection bias we observe in sports of who's getting in and if they're actually getting to play, they're probably decent enough, right? The versus where do we actually observe the selection of this distribution that's being observed, right? It's a hard problem. That varies by the sport too. And this replacement level idea, I remember in that paper, we did just some roster cutoff rule of, each team has X number of players, multiply number of teams, there's a backup, and bam, there we go. That's if you're after this, your replacement. That definition I've always viewed as I don't know. And football's very different salary structure and contracts versus baseball, where baseball literally has, I would say, replacement players that can get just signed and put on a team, called up from the minors. Football doesn't have that. Football, there's practice squad, players on the practice squad that aren't actually in the league and they could get elevated from the practice squad. And so maybe one could say their replacement level in a sense, but it's just it doesn't happen that much. It's why that idea, I don't even know if it generalizes well across sports. We try it across sports, but that's something I've always struggled with. It's a personal thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really depends on the sport for sure. And on the teams. Even in soccer, a replacement level at PSG would not be the same as a replacement level at the last team in the French league. It's I find in soccer it's a bit easier to define than football because you have usually a starting 11. And so basically if you're not regularly in the starting 11 for the big games, you qualify as the replacement level for that team. So it's ready. It's like your first choice out of the bench, basically.
Well, and that's in American football. It's these constant different personnel packages that it's you're one of the 4 wide receivers that are used in the 4 wide receiver set. So it's not like you're not consistently starting. It's just you're a specialist for this particular role or what.
Right.
That's why American football's got this whole different dynamic to it that complicates it because all the substitutions that take place on that level of these skill positions. It's very it's hard to figure out what's the right way to define that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But you seem to really like football because you work a lot on that. So you have actually another paper of yours I want to touch on is your work on the going deep framework. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this paper was the result of when the big datable that I mentioned was first launched. In the first year before it even partnered with Kaggle, the NFL just released this big data set, first 6 weeks of either the 2017 or 2018 season on GitHub. And it was full raw tracking data. So you get all this information, every player, every tenth of a second. And the NFL also adds some event annotations of when the snap was, when the pass was, thrown or the ball arrived. And so it was extremely rich. And what we decided at CMU, a group of us, myself and a number of other PhD students at the time, along with Sam Ventura and a collaborator at Pitt, Kostas Pellikrinis, we were thinking of this idea of how can we extend what I had previously done in that paper of with Sam and then my colleague Max Horowitz on modeling expected points at the play level. How can we take that idea and extend it within the play, being inspired by previous work by Dan Gervone and Luke Bourne on this continuous time EPV that they did in basketball? And how do we do that in football? And part of this first big datable, you could enter the competition, or there was also a special issue with Journal of Quantitative Analysis in Sports. And we decided to go for that path because we probably spent 3 or 4 months coming up with this flow diagram, this flow chart that's in the paper of how do we model football, right? It's a play could either be a drop back where the QB keeps the ball, and if the QB keeps the ball, the QB either will be potentially a design run or scrambling if, gets pressure on them, or eventually the QB gets sacked. Or if the QB is going to throw the ball, who's the QB throw the ball to? Given that he throws the ball to somebody, you need to model, okay, the completion probability. Given, it's all these different models that go together. And then eventually it leads to, if someone is the ball carrier, where are they going to end up on the field, right? And one of the things, though, about this, in this paper, we did this whole process and we just focused on actually building the model to estimate the ending yard line. And I was really naive in how I did this originally, where it's like, oh, we did this like very ML model selection problem where we had like an LSTM versus a lasso versus a this, and you can see, okay, which gives us better expectations of ending yard lines. And then I was stupid and took that ending yard line and fed it through the models that I had for expected points and win probability at the play level. And those models were very simple. It was at the start of a play, what we would do is we had this multinomial logistic regression model that, given initial play context, we'd estimate the probabilities of different scoring events. What would be the next scoring event? And then given those, we would just sum across those associated probabilities with the point values of the different events, and then you would get your expected points at the start of the play. Now, the way one should think about this is this is just some utility function. Ignore the fact it's called expected points. It's just some insert utility function. And what I really cared about was the expected value of this utility function. Now, the problem is I built a model that spit out a single point estimate, and I then just said, oh, I'll throw this point estimate into this utility function and say that the expected value of the utility function. I'm dealing with a very complex utility function. It's asymmetric. It's broken in various ways. Throwing in this point estimate does not give me the expected value of the utility function. And a reviewer that we had for the paper laid this all out for us in like a simple dice example. And I never felt so stupid in my life, but then it led me to this path of, what the hell am I doing? I should just be modeling the distribution. Like, why are we modeling just point estimates? And there's a number of ways you could do it. Like, we could have just gone a Bayesian route, but we had one of our co-authors, Taylor Pospisil, as part of his dissertation work. He developed some high dimensional conditional density estimate techniques, and that led us to then using his random forest for conditional density estimate approach, where now what we did was we had this conditional density estimate for the running back's ending yard line as a function of this tracking data. And now with that full distribution estimate, we integrate over this utility function that we had from this 2019 paper. And then we actually got this nice looking continuous time EPV curve. And it was a lesson for me too of, in the modeling of football data and thinking of how many yards a ball carrier is going to get, modeling the expectation is a bad idea. Just thinking only about the expected value is a bad idea, because if you think about a football field, it's 100 yards and a ball carrier has the ball. The distribution of what they could get, it's going to be really this mixture between, do they go all the way for a touchdown versus some bounded skewed distribution with this tail going towards the target end zone and a big mass near where they're at, probably with defenders around them, right? And so when you model the expectation, you're going to get this line in a low density region. You're actually going to get a value that's not likely to happen. But it's the mean of this distribution. And I still see people consistently do this problem all the time in this, and like, the NGS has like a leaderboard of expected rushing yards, and that's a flawed idea in this concept. The distribution of what you could see for the yards that you gain, it's not normal, right? The mean is not a likely value. It's going to fall somewhere in a low density space, and that's even just more reinforced the importance of we need to constantly remind, students and who we're working with to think about, full uncertainty propagation of what they're trying to do, right? Think about what's the distribution of the outcome? What can that look like? And are you estimating the right thing?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And actually, how do you do that? Since you're like speaking of the classrooms, because you teach a lot. Also, you teach in undergraduate, you teach in master level, and you teach sports analytics, NLP, Bayesian stats. So yeah, I'm curious, how do you communicate these concepts to the students? And also, just curious if there is what's the hardest concept for students to internalize?
Yeah, so for context, my sports analytics class that I've now taught for the past 2 years, and I'm going to be teaching again this spring. I'm turning it into a book, which is exciting. The Statistical Methods in Sports Analytics, to be delivered on April 1st, 2027, which I find hilarious. That's April 1st. April Fools, I wrote a textbook. But it's going to be, what that course really is I have advanced undergrads, juniors, seniors at CMU, as well as master's level students who have taken our core regression course. Then my sports analytics class is really, I've had students tell me this of like, you attracted us to sports, but we really just learned applied Bayesian modeling from you. I didn't realize that, but this carries over into all these other different contexts. I was like, yeah, that's the point, right? Of motivating, of thinking about different problems in sports to lead them to, hey, how do we incorporate prior knowledge and the benefits of polling and, the advantages that we could get from full uncertainty propagation, and how when we want to, in sports, we often want to simulate things. You have a posterior distribution. There you go. There's your simulations. Pump it through whatever you want. You already have the ability to simulate and see what can happen with full uncertainty throughout it, right? It's a wonderful concept. And, illustrating to them it has been really fun. The challenge, though, and this was discussion with Samir Deshpande, who's been on this show before. Because when I was developing this course, I had some conversations with him about actually teaching Bayesian modeling and what advice he had. And his big point to me was getting students to understand how to write out a model and just build models on their own. And what I've realized from doing this is students struggle to literally write down the model, right? They're so familiar with assignments, exams of you're going to fit this model of this assumption and model with this distribution and do these steps. Like we tell them what the model is, right? And so what I decided to do as a homework assignment in the class, and it's by far the lowest grade that they get in the class, this homework grade, it just absolutely murders them, right? Across the board, is I give them context, and I give them a description of the data set, the context of the data, and then I give them problems that I'm interested in, of like, okay, here's a tennis level data set, and here's the description data dictionary, and you want to infer, different server abilities that you have, different returner abilities that are there. And you think that, okay, there might be like an additive shift based on the server level, and you want to account for these different things, but also you have these server characteristics. Write out for me the model that you're going to use, and what are the assumptions? What are the different levels of the model? What's level one? What's the basic observational level unit? What's level two, the higher level unit at like the player server level? What are the characteristics that are there, right? And making them actually write out the model and the data generating process, they struggle with. And it's so funny because it's, I do it in the lectures and I remind them of this, that as I write out these examples, all right, this is our response. We're assuming it follows this distribution. Now, these parameters that we have, we're going to model in this way. And these parameters, we're going to say, follow this particular distribution. Like I write out level one, level two, level three of these models. tell them you got to get familiar with this. And you'll see there are students, they get it. And they ace this homework assignment. And then there are other students that are like, I never have to write out the model. This is just given to me. Like, no, you don't understand. After you leave school, you're going to get a data set, right? You're going to get data. You're going to be working on problems with colleagues and stakeholders. And they're not going to tell you how to write out the model. You need to figure out what is an appropriate model for me to write out, what for me to try out and assume and test and evaluate, right? That step, that's the hardest step for them, I honestly think. Because like teaching them how to code things now and everything there's so many different resources, and then, you can honestly use something like Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT to say, yeah, here's my model, give me the stand code. And it can spit it out reasonably well now, to be frank with you, right? But you still need to know how to write the model, right? It's not going to give you the right code if you don't know what model you want to construct. And that's by far that's the hardest thing to get across to them. And and it's the most important though.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't know. I know that would be the case, but that makes sense for sure. Yeah, that's the hardest part. It's like you're here, you're in front of the computer, and now you have to model because you're actually one of the best modelers in your workplace. I mean, that's why usually you have to do the model because you're the one that's most qualified to do it. So. No, that's great, and that teaches them responsibility. So it makes me think about. That reminds me of. So there's this French comedian. He has this beat about GPS and saying that he's complaining because he's like he never gets what the GPS is telling him. It's not detailed enough. So he's like, we should have GPS levels. Like I would be on the beginner's level where the GPS would tell me. Instead of in 100 meter turn left, I'd be like, prepare yourself, you're gonna have to turn left. No, not really that one, just over here. No, just a bit more. Yeah, here, now, turn left. Yeah, good, very good. And then you go through the level, and then the last level, which is a bit more like what you're doing with this assignment, would be just guess.
Well, that's the thing, right? I tell them what we're interested in, right? What are we interested in actually estimating? Like, what do we care about, right? They need to actually understand. Okay, I know about different distributions. And these are the different types of variables that I have. They need to synthesize that and put it together to write out the actual model. I still tell them though, like, hey, this is the goal. I want to be able to get estimates of these player abilities in these different ways, right? Or whatever the different examples I came up with. But it's just a matter of them being able to synthesize all of the stuff we've discussed and recognize how it fits together. Because it's not just I apply the same thing to everything, which I think they're just so familiar with in a way. Like, this is just this single linear regression, so throw it all in there. Part of me thinks it's like the ML indoctrination of students where like, all right, I'm going to run lasso, I'm going to run ridge, and I'll run random forest, and I'll run XGBoost. They do all of these different predictive techniques, and then they throw them into whatever tuning grid that's prone to multiple testing problems anyway, then they never think about that. But there's a lack of statistical thinking that goes on through that type of exercise. And I want them to get the statistical thinking back in the model building that I think ML kind of pushes them away from. Yeah.
Oh man, that's amazing. I would have loved having you as a professor at university. That would have made my life so much easier and faster. So, like, if any of your students are listening, listen to Professor Brown, guys. He's gonna make you save a lot of time in your life. And I mean, I can see that it's really one of your goals, right? Because both your book and your Substacks are called Statistical Thinking in Sports Analytics. So Yeah, it sounds to be really something you're focused on right now. Do you want to talk a bit about that, by the way? Like, what are your objectives with the book, with the Substack? What role it plays in keeping your classroom content fresh, maybe things like that?
Yeah. With the Substack, it's a statistical thinking sports analytics, and it was really my way of uh, trying to do things in terms of sharing both just work we're doing at CMU, what my students are doing, as well as I was trying to spend some time to like write about work I see publicly. And I've been so bad at managing that Substack that now, though, with this book that I signed a contract for, which is called Statistical Methods in Sports Analytics. I pitched it as statistical thinking, and they said I just changed it to methods. Like, oh darn. But the idea of that is, what are some of the, when I'm teaching these students the big ideas and problems that they're working on in sports analytics, and what are the fundamental methodology, methods that they need to know in tackling these different types of problems. And at the end of the day, this book it's not going to go really into the player tracking data space. I only touch on that at the end because in my class, I only get at it at the end. It was so funny. It was when I first scoped out this course, I was going to do this whole first half of the semester where we talk about modeling things like expected goals, expected points, and then, okay, how do we account for player level information in there? And then that leads us into multi-level modeling and this bridge of hierarchical models, and going then into fully Bayesian approaches and having player level effects and these adjusted plus minus techniques, and then going into state-space models. And I thought I was going to do that entirely in the first half of the semester. And then the second half was going to be player tracking data. And then I taught the course, and the first half became the entire semester. So the player tracking data, I realized, I can't, I only get it to it at the very end as a tease. And so this book is this scope of going from, all right, let's model discrete game states, and then the progression of how do we evaluate player team performance? How do we go into head-to-head performances of teams, and or getting into Bradley Terry models, and then going from the static into dynamic into state-space modeling. And like the state-space techniques are really the end point of the course, of even connecting to just all the ideas back through it, of thinking of I'm estimating wrap them with this regularized just plus minus for basketball players. And well, you can do this in a state-space approach too, right? You can have player abilities evolve from one year to the next in some way. And so it's a really fun class. And in the development of it and teaching of it, it's led me down the path of, trying to get a sense of, what are the important techniques that are relevant across these different sports, and also exposure to just a variety of different sports. So at CMU, American football and basketball are by far the two biggest sports. Like I do a little poll at the beginning to see what people are interested in, and that's dominated both years. Then we see soccer, baseball, tennis, a little bit more, but then F1 is a big one. So that's why I've been thinking about, all right, these students love F1, the structure of modeling that, right? And thinking about like Plackett-Lewis type models of dealing with this whole ranking system and preserving that dependency structure that's unique. I've never done that before, but it also connects to thinking about like modeling the draft across different sports. And so, that's led me to, I got to think about how do I develop content related to those problems, because when students are interested in it, and it's very relevant. And it has its own unique structure. And so that's one of my goals even for this next year, because I didn't cover that outside of what students that on specific projects did. Like I only worked with them on the specific project. I realized this is such a cool concept and important. I got to get this to everybody. And so like that's going to be incorporated in the class next year as well as into the book. And it's again at the idea of thinking about the data that you're dealing with, and what are the restrictions of that data that you're facing, and how do you handle in sports the dependency structure that you have, right? The dependency structure motivates the usage of these hierarchical models. It's all repeated measurements of players, repeated measurements of teams observed across some longitudinal period of time, right? And it's real data. And that lends itself so well to teaching these concepts that when I tell students, this carries across, it's not just in sports, it's medical data, it's every field, right? And the unfortunate thing is you really are never truly dealing with independent data, right? To the real world. It's very rare. I don't know, I've never had independent data, but all the things they initially learn is all about independent data. I could go on for this forever. Sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, I think this is super interesting for people to hear, because you're at the intersection of a lot of different fields and teaching and practice also. So I think it's super interesting to have your perspective here. And actually, before I want to also pick your brain about a bit more, like de-zooming a bit and having a broader lens. But I want you to talk also a bit about the work of one of your students, Quan Nguyen, who's worked a lot for his thesis on modeling turn angle variability of NFL players. And I know you really loved that work, and it's indeed super interesting. So what can you tell us about that? And of course, I will put in the show notes any link that is important, especially the archive link.
Yeah. So Kwong just finished his third year stats PhD student here at CMU, and he's been actually teaching our summer undergrad research program and still managed to pump out this manuscript. He is an absolute machine at what he does. And this is just a piece of what was his thesis proposal, where this component, what he's been doing, modeling player movement and tracking data, and he's been borrowing actually from ecological literature of modeling animal movement. And so it's the vectors of displacement of an athlete on the field, and then looking at, okay, the angle between these two displacement vectors. And in football, this is so interesting because players can greatly vary, right, in their ability, how they turn, right? Some players are more shifty than others, right? And so Kwong looked at modeling this for running plays as well as receivers after the catch, and did this in such a way that, like, all right, look, this is circular data. We're going to appropriately handle that distribution assumption. But what's really of interest for us, it's not that certain players are going to be biased towards like turning to the left or the right. What's of interest is their variance, right? Like the variability in their turn angle. And so what we did was we had this hierarchical model with effectively these random effects of the player at the concentration parameter for the von Mises distribution, right? And so what you could get at this is different players vary in terms of their variability, right? It's another model with non-constant variance. That's all this is. It's just the non-constant variance being attributed at the player level, and different distributions for different positions. And the results are really fun. This is one of the reasons why he wanted to get out just as this individual paper, because American football fans and folks really, really love what we see in this. It's just for a particular window of time from the big datable sample, but we saw some things that were kind of cute in the way of one wide receiver, DK Metcalf, being the lowest variability, and he's someone that after he gets the ball, he takes off like a Terminator, just running towards the end zone. And then on the exact opposite side was a wide receiver, George Pickens, who displayed the most variability. And when he catches the ball, he's like holding the ball with one hand and he's just kind of spinning around. It's just chaos in how he's moving, right? And Colin connected this then to things like, the speed measurements that we have, and as well as like what they did in like combine drills. And this is just one piece though of this bigger picture of how do we properly model player movement at this scale. And from that, the idea of, we can infer the player level attributions, but what's what explains the variability in the angle and the direction of the angle as a function of just what's being observed with the tracking data. That's another piece of this. Now we just hit on really like the player level interpretation for it, and this demonstration of the variability that's due to the player in their turn angle concentration. But there's gotta be more to come from that work and other pieces. So if anybody's very much interested in the player tracking data space, definitely look up Kwong Wen and all the stuff he's been working on. It's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And again, the archive link will be in the show notes for people who are interested in that. But yeah, that's super fun work. I love it, and how actionable it is super interesting. Really love that. It's been a while now, so I need to play us out because I don't want to take too much of your time. But before the last two questions, I'd like to take a broader view, and something I'm wondering is if you could embed with any pro team for one season, be it NFL, MLB, NBA, whatever you want. What unanswered analytic question would you tackle first, and what data set would you want to collect?
So, yeah, this is going to sound silly, and people know about that. People that know about my interest in football have heard me say this before. But I really want to see in American football visuals and data for snaps. And so when the center literally snaps the ball back to the quarterback, I want to see almost like a strike zone that we have in baseball for the location of snaps. And we don't have this, all right? This would require some spatial location. Where does the ball arrive and the quarterback? But there's variability there. And I want that data. And I want to see how much does the variability in snap quality relate to the performance on the play, right? And I've told people about this. It's got to matter. That's my belief. And it's a silly problem, but I would love to be able to see and get an answer to it. Because if anybody ever watches a football game and a quarterback standing in shotgun, they will see the ball vary by placement. You'll see the best centers, it'll be more consistent. The QB will consistently get the ball where it's at. But if you get a bad snap, a high snap, or a low snap, it's going to disrupt the play. It changes the timing, right? And some quarterbacks are probably better at handling bad snaps versus good snaps, and versus other quarterbacks. But I just don't have the data, so I can't make any conclusions yet. And I would love to be able to see that at some point. And the technology's there probably to do it.
Yeah. I mean, cool. If we have some NFL folks listening here, guys, you gotta give Ron some of that data. Maybe anonymized, but like, come on, gotta make Ron happy. And also something I think is gonna be super interesting given your career and what you do is like what advice do you usually give people who want to break into the sports analytics industry, whether that's linked to academia like you're doing and love doing, or if it's in a pro team?
The biggest thing I tell students always is you need to develop a sports analytics portfolio, all right, of projects that you work on, that you've done. And with that, you need to self-promote. All right. And that's a really annoying part. It's really weird to self-promote all the time, but it's so crucial in this industry of getting your work out there. Right. And the challenge of developing a portfolio is often these are students that they don't have the time. They're full-time students. They don't necessarily have the time to set aside and go, okay, I'm going to not work on what I need to do for class and build a pitch model that I could show some MLB teams, right? They're already doing as much as they can, and they might even have a part-time job to help them pay for school and whatnot. And so Yeah, one of the things I try to do, at least here at CMU, and I encourage other instructors out there as well, is to get it to be in the classroom, and where students, while they're getting their course grades and their course credits, they're also developing that portfolio that they can showcase. It's not just about exams; it's about what projects can they build, and if you get it involved in the classroom, then it's a win-win. They're adding to their portfolio, they're learning, and they don't have to figure out how they scope out the time to get something for these teams, because that's what they're looking for. And it's very different in sports versus other industries. I worked briefly modeling commercial loan risk. I didn't need to have a portfolio of commercial loan risk models before I got that job. I talked about what I did in baseball before I got that job. But if I want to get a job in baseball, it's like, oh, what did you do before that shows us the passion for this, right? And it's probably not fair, and that's why I think it's crucial for educators out there to create those opportunities for students, such that it can be something they can actually achieve, because it's the most important thing. That portfolio, and then going out and self-promoting and networking, they're crucial for entering the industry.
Right. Yeah. Great advice. Definitely resonate with that. And yeah, I think that's a good point. I had never thought about that, but yeah, if teachers and instructors can bake that into their curriculum, where they have to develop, students have to develop something for their portfolio, or I would say something that may even be better is contributing to an open source software. That is definitely something amazing, because this is out there. People can see what you're doing. You've contributed to, let's say you contribute to Stan or PyMC or something like that. These are big packages used everywhere in industry. So that's not only a signal that you can do it, you have the grit and persistence to do it, but also your code is good enough because it's included in a code base that, thousands of companies and even more people are using throughout the world. So when we add something to PyMC, it's thoroughly tested, because if we break something, then that's you can always solve it, fix it, but that's always much more of a pain than making sure it's actually working before you deploy. Of course, there's some stuff you don't catch, but yeah, like it's a signal of a lot of different things, as you were saying. And also, if you do it, by definition, it's on your free time, so it's also demonstrating your passion for it. Yeah, like it demonstrates a lot of good qualities that usually recruiters are looking for. And yeah, I think that'd be great if that were more integrated into the different curricula.
And it's hard to do it. It's like
Right.
it's the scoping out of the classes and opportunities that you have to figure it out. Because you want to teach them so much. But it's a great way for them to learn too, is to get these projects involved and this active learning experience that we always harp on. It's because I talk too much.
That's awesome. Like I gotta tell you, like you make my job much easier. Any topics we didn't talk about that you wanted to cover today?
No, I think hit on a lot of it with definitely encourage people to check out the work by PhD student Kwong Wen, and see everything that he's been developing, and then just stay tuned for developments on the textbook Statistical Methods in Sports Analytics. And the last thing I'd say is, which I mentioned at the very beginning, we do have our annual Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics Conference that'll be coming up this year on October 24th, 25th. The keynote address will be by Dean Oliver, sort of the godfather of basketball analytics. And then the closing keynote will be Alec Patani, who he's currently with Google, and he also had worked with Dean at ESPN. So it's going to be a fun event. We're getting things organized and underway for that. And so people can, the website will be up to date fairly soon, in next week or the week after, and then people will be able to check out the information. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Definitely let me know. So send me the link when it's online, because I'll add that to the show notes for people to start enrolling? Are you doing a call for proposal for talks, or is that all done?
So we're gonna have we run a reproducible research competition each year with the conference, and so there will be an opportunity for that, as well as a opportunity to submit poster abstracts too. So I'll definitely send you the link. The link it currently takes you to last year's page, but it'll just redirect to this year's when it's up and running.
Yes. So that's just a sign that the website is nostalgic, right? It's like, oh my god, it was so much better last year. Man. Gotta replace the software, update the software with a more optimistic one. No, man, it was great last year. It's gonna be even better this year. Come on, dude. So let's definitely do that. When that episode is gonna air, the website is gonna be working. So that's gonna work out perfectly. Your website for the conference is gonna be up. So awesome. Yeah, that's great. I'll see if I can come up at CMU. That'd be fun to meet you all in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, if you guys want to do a live show, if you have that on the slot, if you want to do that, I'm down to organize that with you. That's usually I love doing that. I just
nice.
did one
we should talk about
day.
it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I'll reach out to you about that later. Yeah, it's a good idea.
It's always super fun. I always love doing that. So and it's a good excuse for me to travel. So very happy to help with that if you guys wanna add that. Actually, the next episode, so not this week, but the following one will be the one I did a few weeks ago at Imperial College London, talking about epidemiology, statistical epidemiology, so that's going to be a fun one too. Awesome. Well, Ron, I think we can call it a show, but first, obviously, I'm going to ask you the last questions. I ask everyone at the end of the show, right? So, first one. If you had unlimited time and resources, which problem would you try to solve? Apart from animations for NFL, as you just said before, you cannot say that again.
People definitely give really good answers to this all the time, and the different problems that are out there. I guess for me, I'll say something. One of the reasons why I actually decided to do genetics work was in my mom's family, there was this rare mutation that leads to a form of muscular dystrophy. And, these type of rare mutation diseases and figuring out cures for them, to me, if I had all the time in the world, and it's something that, we talk about the role of probability in our life. My grandmother had this, and it was just a 50-50 shot whether my mom would get it. And she didn't get it, right? And then I can't get it. Unfortunately, my uncle suffered from it in his life. And my grandmother, she was one of 13 kids. About half of them had this, right? And I think about if I had all the time in the world to solve something, it would be, how do you cure these mutations that are out there in the genetic code? And maybe we'll get to that at some point. There's been so much great advancement in the technology for it, but it's definitely something. It's the role of chance in life.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Damn, 50-50 shot is just like way too high for that kind of things.
Yeah.
It's just like fascinating research on that. I love to read always not papers. Hate reading papers, but reading anything that's made for reading. Any research on CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing is just absolutely fascinating. And actually, I'd love to have someone who does that on the show one day. So if anybody in the audience knows someone who does, that kind of research in gene editing using some Bayesian research, please contact me and I'll get that organized, because it's absolutely super fascinating research and so impactful it sounds basically that this kind of disease that looks like gene editing with CRISPR-Cas9 is our best shot right now.
Yeah, and it's one of many of those types, right? That probably down the road it could be cured.
Yeah. yeah, look at HIV right now and what having HIV a generation ago meant for your lifespan. It's just like very, very different. So, yeah. Damn. Great answer, Ron. Thanks. And second question: if you could have dinner with any great scientific mind, dead, alive, or fictional, who would it be?
There's a lot of good answers to this. Someone I'm going to say that I just missed interacting with at CMU was Steven Feinberg. So he passed away in 2016. I started my PhD in 2017, and he sort of a legend in the statistics field. And he was supposed to be a fantastic person, and really was so well respected amongst everybody in the department. And it's, I wish I could get a conversation with him and pick his brain on statistics. And I remember when I moved into my office, there was like still remnants of Feinberg textbooks and notes at different places, and just coming across it. And he was somebody I would love to have a conversation with about statistics.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Damn, great answers today, Ron. You're on your A game. Yeah, definitely starting quarterback today. Also, well, yeah, it was fantastic to have you on the show, Ron. You're welcome back anytime. Good luck for the CMU conference, because I know it takes time and work to organize a conference, but this is, as someone who enjoys conference a lot, I thank you for it. And well, next time you have something to share, you'll let me know. I'll come back on the show. And show notes, folks, there are going to be a lot of links today for you. So for those who want to dig deeper, you have all the links there. You have also all the links to Ron's socials, his link to his Substack, to his upcoming book, his website. And again, thanks a lot, Ron, for taking the time and being on this show.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
This has been another episode of Learning Bayesian Statistics. Be sure to rate, review, and follow the show on your favorite podcatcher, and visit learnbayesstats.com for more resources about today's topics, as well as access to more episodes to help you reach true Bayesian state of mind. That's learnbayesstats.com. Our theme music is Good Bayesian by Baba Brinkman, feat. MC Lars and Megaran. Check out his awesome work at bababrinkman.com. I'm your host, Alex Andorra. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex_Andorra, like the country. You can support the show and unlock exclusive benefits by visiting patreon.com/learnbayesstats. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. You're truly a
good Bayesian. Change your predictions after taking information in. And if you're thinking I'll be less than amazing, let's adjust those expectations. Let me show you how to